So just a little intro of us, 350. So this is 350 South Florida Action. This is the political branch of 350 South Florida, which is part of the global climate organization 350.org. That was founded about 10 years ago by author Bill McKibben. And the name comes from 250 parts per million, which is what scientists deemed that the safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would be to avoid really seeing many impacts of climate change. Unfortunately, we are now close to 420 parts per million, so we've shot well past that. And it's getting very, very tight as far as how much time we have left to avoid some of the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. We're already seeing significant changes. The fish kill in Biscayne Bay that's happening right now is just one example, with water temperatures so warm that the fish don't have enough oxygen to breathe. But carbon dioxide levels now are higher than at any point in the last 800,000 years, which is pretty frightening, and that's well before there was any such a thing as human civilization. So 350, seeks to move towards a 100% renewable energy for all economy and society by stopping all new fossil fuel projects and not providing one more penny for dirty energy, fossil fuel energy, and the financiers of such projects. So that's a bit about us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Elijah.
Sure, absolutely. Well, again, my name's Elijah Manley. I am born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am running for the Florida House of Representatives, District 94, which covers Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors, Oakland Park, Plantation, and some of Lauderhill. I was born and raised here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, a proud graduate of Fort Lauderdale High School. And like you all, I'm just really concerned about the direction of the country, the state of Florida, specifically with environmental policy, and the failure of Tallahassee to act boldly on climate change. We've seen a lot. We've seen some funding go towards the Everglades restoration, but we haven't seen a lot of talk about sea level rise. We haven't seen a lot of talk about what we can actually do here in Florida to become a carbon neutral state. And I believe that Florida should be leading the path for the entire country to move towards 100% clean energy, a carbon neutral economy by 2030. Wherever Florida goes, I believe the country goes. So, I'm running, and I'm proudly running to be a Green New Deal candidate. I'm a candidate who believes that right now, as a coastal community, having a district that's on the coast with a large minority population, I understand that there is intersections between climate change and racial justice. And it's important for Florida to show in its environmental policy where this goes. So, I'm glad to be in a race. I'm glad that you all invited me here. I look forward to talking about my policy and what we can do going forward. I think someone's on mute.
Yeah. So just briefly, which areas does your district include?
It covers Fort Lauderdale, west of US 1. It covers East Plantation, which is pretty much east of University. It covers most of Wilton Manors. It covers some of Lauderhill and some of Oakland Park. So it's a Central Broward district. If you live in Central Broward, from downtown or Wilton Manors to close to 441, you're in my district. I think you're on mute again.
Yes, we're having some issues here. All righty, well, thank you. So right now, obviously, we're living in some interesting times, to put it mildly. We have this viral pandemic that has been horribly mismanaged at the state and federal level. We've got, police brutality epidemic as well. We have the beginnings of, what could be a worst economic collapse since the Depression, and then the climate crisis looming above all of that. So how do you see these issues all kind of relating to each other? And what would your first priorities be if we send you to Tallahassee?
That's a good question, because, when we're talking about, climate change, when we're talking about the economy, when we're talking about a global health pandemic like COVID-19, we're kind of talking about the same thing. We're all talking about a stinking rot in our government, a broken government that isn't working for anyone except those at the top. And we see an issue in American society where we have a problem with money in politics. We're moving towards oligarchy. And we see how all of those issues play into climate change, into the economy, into housing, into all of these different issues. But specifically, let's start with the pandemic, since that is the meat on the table right now, COVID-19, and the response of the state of Florida to COVID-19, and how this relates to everything. I'll start by saying that the governor felt leading us through this pandemic, and now Florida is becoming the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. We felt to lead, we felt to act boldly to stop the increase in cases in COVID-19. But one of the things I have said from the very, very beginning is we shouldn't just look at this public health crisis as just, it's just a flu, it's just a little thing, and we got to get a vaccine for it. That we're going to see an increase in infectious and airborne and waterborne diseases due to climate change. I've said this from the start. I said the ice is going to start melting. The atmosphere is going to start getting a lot warmer, and we need to think about the quality of our water, waterborne diseases that come from that, infectious airborne diseases as well, due to climate change. So I said, when we're talking about public health, we can't just look at legislation about how to prevent, how to react to a public health crisis like COVID-19. We have to think about how to prevent, and we have to also think about the next generation of public health crises that are going to be facing our state in the next decade or the next 2 decades, might we say. And I don't think we're thinking innovatively about this. I don't think we're thinking about water quality and how crucial and important that is for South Florida, for the whole state of Florida, but for South Florida specifically, as we have an aquifer that provides drinking water to about 8 million people here. And when we're talking about fracking, we're talking about all of these things. What doesn't get included in any of this, sea level rise, we talk about that a lot, is the potential for waterborne diseases as well, and water quality. This is not a third world country issue. This is a first world country issue. This is a next generation issue, but it's an issue that we need to start talking about now. So if I'm elected, I've said that I will be, whether that's introducing legislation or making recommendations to the governor's office, or working with municipal governments to find a way to not react, to be proactive, to prevent these issues. So the best way is to get ahead. And the best way of getting ahead to that right now is moving resources. Everyone can say the words all they want. They can say climate change, sea level rise, let's do this, let's do that. But it's all about action. And action means it's all about money. And that means we need to re-examine our priorities right now in the state of Florida and on the municipal government levels as well. And the state level specifically, re-examine what our priorities should be. There shouldn't be prisons. It shouldn't be putting money in large corporations. It shouldn't be cutting taxes. It shouldn't be giving money to private schools. It should be to combat climate change. It should be to combat these next generation of issues of public health crisis. So it's all about the money and the resources. And if I'm sent to the House next Tuesday, I'll be ready to fight for that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that in-depth, comprehensive answer to a very difficult question. So following up on that, a lot of the nonprofit groups like 350.org have responded to the COVID pandemic by calling for a just recovery, which means that the following 5 principles need to be the bedrock of any COVID relief packages, either sent through Congress or at the state or local level, which broadly speaking are: number 1, prioritizing the health of people, including undocumented, incarcerated, and homeless people, providing direct economic relief through unemployment insurance, housing, food aid, direct cash, putting people over profits, ensuring that businesses that are accepting aid, have to meet basic, worker safety standards and provide a living wage, allow for organizing, invest in a regenerative economy by preventing future crises by not, bailing out fossil fuel companies and investing in our renewable and natural infrastructure, and then protecting democracy by expanding vote by mail, online, voter or automatic voter registration, and funding fully the census and the post office. So seems like you would agree with that based on your previous statements, but I'll just ask again, do you agree with those 5 principles?
Yeah, you can find some of those in my platform on my website. Absolutely on board with automatic voter registration, with people over profits. And I don't think you'll see too much of that from my opponent on most of these issues. But yeah, I think I would agree with those.
Fantastic. So as the intersection, with climate and racial justice, how do you see these two issues related to each other?
I see. I mean, it's a big answer to this. It's no real simple answer. It's like really delving down, understanding how it relates to just about everything in society. But I mean, just like with healthcare, we see the people who get affected the most by these things, and it really turns the entire system over on its head. Like when we look at healthcare, for example, and we see the disparities in healthcare, whether it be Black infant mortality rate, or whether it be other issues affecting the access to public hospitals and communities, which I have a platform planning to handle that as well, if elected. It's the same with climate change. It's also about how we talk about climate change as well, because usually the conversation around climate change is the seas are rising. But climate change is a lot more, complex than just the seas are rising or it's just getting hotter. It's a lot of things. It's food, it's food deserts is included in that as well. Food that you can afford in your own community. That ties into the whole economic side of that, where when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about infrastructure. We see how infrastructure in different parts of the town is a lot better and a lot more resilient than infrastructure in certain parts of the town that have like a Black community, for example, that I live in, where, when it rains, it's quicker to flood in those areas than it is in downtown because of the storm, the drainage systems and stormwater systems that they have. So the issue is that resources is not going or not being allocated to the right areas correctly. And because like everything in our society right now, there is a racist lens on it, on how resources are allocated. So it's the same with anything related to the environment, protecting the environment, and also climate action. So climate action is not, I hear people say this all the time, but climate action should not be a colorblind situation. It shouldn't be at all. It isn't. When we're talking about this, we need to be talking about everything from climate gentrification to the waste sites and the farmer dump sites that are still in our communities. I live right across the street from one, actually. It's now a park. And how all of those things, we used to get school actually, now it's a park. They had to close the school. And air quality as well, and how that ties into health disparities, people getting sick, because they live in communities that used to be a trash dump. It used to be a trash plant, and now it's a school, and now it's a park, and now it's a neighborhood where Black and brown lives are living in those communities, and now they're getting sick, and they're getting cancer, they're getting lung cancer, they're getting deformities, birth defects, they're getting other issues, and then they don't have the capital, the money, the resources to actually go to the hospital and be able to afford to get the treatment. So then they just die as a result. And then you have generations of health problems, generations of diabetes, generations of lung cancer, generation of health issues due to the environment families were put in, and they can't leave that environment because they also do not have the resources to do it. So it all ties in, whether it's healthcare, whether it's housing, or where the housing is, whether it's being able to go to schools, being able to afford to go to places, where it's being able to access food in your community that you can actually get and you can afford, that's in your close vicinity. So everything is just tying into each other, and you see this big revolving cycle of poverty, and climate change is part of that. because I guarantee you in certain communities or certain parts of our county, for example, where I am, it's a whole different reality.
Well, thanks for all of that. That's definitely a great answer. And you've touched on a lot of issues there, which maybe you can explain a little bit more, would be great. For example, climate gentrification. I know that some of us know what that is, what is meant by that, but if you'd like to explain, that would be great. And then more specifically, what could you do at the state level to address that kind of a problem?
Yep. So, I mean, just like with gentrification, I mean, I've seen this firsthand. I'm 21. I'm young, so a lot of people wouldn't think you would see something like this young. But I grew up in a historic cis-trunk community in Fort Lauderdale, a Black community, and there are generations of people who live there. I mean, I met a guy today, and I even have family members. This is true for them as well. But even a guy today who's over 80. There was a time when you could not go past those tracks past 7 p.m. if you were Black. You couldn't be on the beach. You couldn't be in Eastern Fort Lauderdale. You couldn't go across those tracks. It was a completely different reality. You were caught past there, you probably get beaten up, thrown in jail by cops. And there's generations of people there, and they'll tell me all the time, it looked a lot different. It looked a lot different. And what we see is gentrification. We see, a lot of new development in the area, a lot of new expensive places, and we see a lot of people who are not from that area, people who are not of our community, moving in at alarming rates. You see a lot of white people moving in. I'll just be frank with it. They're moving in and they have the money to come in, and you see block by block every year, block by block. They'll move past this street and they'll just start taking over. And it's not just that they're taking over. No one cares, that specifically that someone's moving into the area. It's that people are being pushed out of the area because people can't afford to rent anymore. The property values are going up. They can't afford to eat there anymore. I mean, after a while, you have a Whole Foods sitting on a corner and no one will be able to buy there. But climate gentrification is similar. What that is you have people who live out on Fort Lauderdale Beach or who live closer in eastern Fort Lauderdale, in the same district, a lot of those people. And they live in their beachfront properties, they live in their mansions, they live in their nice homes, some of them in middle-class neighborhoods. And it gets worse every year. Every hurricane season, they get really bad hurricanes, and a lot of them, have to cross over, they have to move inland. But a lot of these people understand that sea level rise is real. It's not that people don't think it's real. A lot of them know that this is real. So what they're doing now is they're moving away from the coast. And, I mean, that's I'm not going to say that's not smart. They're moving away from the coast because they know sea level rise is a big issue. And after some time, they're not going to be able to stay there anymore. So they move away from the coast and they're moving inland. However, when they're moving inland, it's not as simple as people think it is. They're moving inland and they're replacing people in different communities. They're moving into our community. They're moving into places like Citron, people in places like Diller. They're moving in places like Melrose Park. They're buying the property there. They're buying people out. They're telling people you have to leave. And people who live in those homes on those corners, for decades. They've had family members going back to the 30s and 40s living there, being bought out and told to leave. And what happens is you have someone with a lot of resources coming in, they're moving in, they're living there, or they're buying up the property and they're moving somewhere else. And the people who are moving in those properties are not like us. They're not our background. They don't have our same socioeconomic status. All of that history is being removed. And then other people are moving in and people are being pushed out. So that's what climate gentrification is. We're seeing that in real time in our community, in Cis-Trunk, and other places. And it's going to continue it's not going to be an issue that goes away anytime soon. But as a state representative, I can't, as one person, I can't change the entire reality of that. But what I'll say I can do is I think we need to invest money into affordable housing, into our public housing, to keep and maintain the projects that we do have. It's the truth. They have not spent a single dime on public housing since the 80s, since Reagan. And they completely said we're not doing anything. So now in my community, 2 blocks from my house, there are green apartments, the federal apartments, all of those apartments that are still there from when my mom grew up, when she was born. And there have not been a single repair to those properties. AC still in the windows, moldy, rat infested. mildew, asbestos, wiring and electric issues, unsafe. Sometimes there's fires, and it's a whole neighborhood of those, and people are living in those areas. And what we need now is we need to invest money to, instead of replacing those people and pushing those people out, or letting those properties stay the same, and management companies that don't want to do anything. How about this? How about we knock it down and rebuild it and put those people that live there their entire lives back where they live at? That's the right thing to do. So things like that would help, because the argument developers are making is that it's a rundown place. We can do better. But the truth is, we can do better, and the answer is not to privatize it and just destroy it, and put fancy high rises and condominiums there. The answer is to keep the people who live there in their communities where they grew up their entire life. And how about this? How about we just invest money into it? So that's what I want to do.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned quite a bit about infrastructure, certainly housing, but also aging sewage and septic tanks that are causing people. Before the pandemic hit, Fort Lauderdale was in the news for the massive sewage spill, and people have had to boil water just whenever there's a heavy rain because the system just can't keep up. Obviously, as climate change gets worse and sea levels rise, that's just going to put even more stress on that system. Since it doesn't seem like there's a lot of action happening at the state level on this. Again, how can we start moving on on these massive projects that we need if we're going to really have a resilient future?
So there's several things we can do. It's a mixture of both local governments and state governments. One of the problems one of the biggest problems is the local government, the city of Fort Lauderdale. And that is the city of Fort Lauderdale continuously raiding their infrastructure funds to put it towards other things. Like, let's build a park, or let's rebuild a police station. Let's do a bond and rebuild a police station. Or let's, have some other development, or let's put it towards this, let's put it towards that. Instead of investing the money that's supposed to go to infrastructure and keep leaving that money alone. Let's borrow, let's keep borrowing. I call it raiding, stealing from the community. So the city has an opportunity, and still does have the opportunity, to fix the problem. The problem is you have these lines. The problem is you have these lines in the ground for 50 cents, and they have not been replaced. The problem is try to put it back together or replace the entire system. It needs to be replaced every 10 or 15 years, maybe sooner, maybe 6. That's what needs to happen. And the city needs to be more responsible with the resources they have, because we don't see a lot of responsibility right now with the city. The other thing that I say is the state can help. But what I don't want to happen as a state representative is, I go and I get resources for the city. I go and I get appropriations for the city, and the city put it to something else. I don't want to say, here's your money to go build the 5-ash water treatment facility. Here's your water to go fix the broken water mains and all of these lines. And then all of that money goes towards something else. They decide, a year later, hey, you know what? We're going to just borrow $10 million from these funds, or we're going to just take this to go do this. That I don't want to see. So the issue really is the city of Fort Lauderdale is going to have to get their act together. They can blame each other. They can blame everybody, go back and forth. But right now, today, the city has an obligation. I do believe the current mayor is trying to do that, but he needs to get his act together. They all need to get their act together and fix this issue before it's too late. And everybody is accountable. Everybody's responsible, and everybody needs to get their act together. As a state representative, the most I can do is bring the money home. I can go to Tallahassee and get the money. I can get the appropriations. I can get them their money. But what I don't want to happen is I go and get the money for the city to fix this issue, and they don't do the right thing with the money. Because what will happen is when I ask for that same appropriation the next year, the governor will veto it, because he will know, why am I giving Fort Lauderdale all of this damn money? And it's just going down the gutter. So, I'll work on this. I'll have conversations with those elected officials about getting their act together.
Excellent. And touching on a few of the other issues that you brought up, you mentioned in some of in the places where you grew up, people are still using those old window air conditioners. I'm sure they're terribly energy inefficient. There's probably not a lot of insulation in the homes to prevent energy, cooling loss. And with temperatures rising, there's an increased risk of health effects from severe heat, and of course the fact that so many people are spending a huge amount of their monthly budget on just electricity. So again, like with the FPL having a very large influence over the state government, again, how do you think that we can get them to do more to help the communities that are struggling to pay their electricity bills, and to encourage them to use less, by improving efficiency and improving the infrastructure?
I think we're going to break up the monopolies on utilities in Florida. One of the ways is really reforming how the PSC works on a state level is going to be crucial to doing that. There's a lot of proposed reforms that people have. I'm not going to pretend I really know what those reforms were going to be for the PSC specifically. I do think it's great that the governor made some of those appointments and not the legislature, because the legislature is all bought by the FPL, and they get donations from FPL and utilities, and they do whatever they say. And their PATs get tens of thousands of dollars from FPL. So we can't really count on them to really do the right thing, unfortunately. But I think one of the things is, this is not an individual problem. I hate making it individual. I hate saying, people should do more of this, people should do more of that. It's a systemic problem. It's something the government needs to act on. But there are some things people can do individually. They could, use less electricity when they don't need it. Same with water. Use less water. A lot of people turn the water on like it's just nonstop, like it will never run out, and that's not the case. Same with electricity. We have to put in our work as individuals, but it would be smart for the government, the state, to do its part as well. So I do believe in exploring the ideal of having some municipal control over the utilities, over electricity specifically, and seeing if we could do, I know this will cost a lot of money to do. It's like broadband, municipal broadband. It will cost a lot of money to do. It's not something it's really feasible to do right away, but it's something we can explore and try to do as much as possible. FPL, we got to get a hold on FPL's monopoly, but we have to get the money out of politics. Is going to be probably the end goal to do it this specifically. Otherwise, none of these possibilities are ever going to actually be a reality.
All right. Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that what I meant by using less is more conservation through efficiency that's not necessarily up to the tenant, but improving the housing, and of course providing the ability to for FPL, providing the ability for folks to upgrade, because they are actually currently I think they provide the least amount of funding as far as energy conservation efforts and other utilities in the area.
I think there's some things we could do, like exploring like sustainable housing as well is going. I don't know. I don't count on that to be in any legislative session anytime soon. But exploring how we do that, like I think one of the biggest problems is we have this really big development issue, and it's just build everywhere, and that does have an effect on the power grid. And the power grid is outdated. It's really outdated. It's really old. It is relying on fossil fuels. So it shouldn't be relying on fossil fuel anymore. We need to upgrade away from fossil fuel as soon as possible. And we also need to make some major upgrades as well. I think, there's a lot we could do, and the state has to really put up the resources to do it, but I'm not counting on that to be any legislative session. But the short answer is just some sustainable housing or sustainable development, like where necessary. Okay. But where it's not necessary, we don't need to build, 50-story skyscrapers. Where it's not needed, we don't need a 50-story skyscraper, because that's not just putting a stress on other utilities. That's putting a big stress on the water as well, on our water systems. That's why we're having the problem in Fort Lauderdale, is because of places everywhere. So now we're having the water 80 years old that were not built to handle 50 skyscrapers. So
right. So with all of these the infrastructure projects that kind of need to get done, often the big question many people ask is, well, how do we pay for it, especially with a coming economic crunch because of the coronavirus? And what would your response be to that?
Simple. We need to have major tax reform in Florida. This is going to be popular with everyone, but I do believe we should have an income tax in Florida. I don't think it should be high like the federal government, but I do think there should be an income tax, and it should be a progressive income tax, where it's virtually nothing for everyone else. But if you're a millionaire or billionaire, you should be paying something. A lot of states, most states do have some form of an income tax. A lot don't. Florida is one of the only states that do not have an income tax. And that's why a lot of people move down here and come here to retire as well. Yes, we don't have an income tax. But what we do have is we have a sales tax, which is regressive, and it affects a lot of poor people who, they're going to get food, they're going shopping to get clothes, to get things in. They have these high taxes that they have to pay. But millionaires and billionaires are paying nothing to the state of Florida. Corporations like FPL, corporations like all of these other corporations like Walmart, all of these corporations coming down here, multinational, national corporations coming down here, and they're free riding. They're not paying nothing to Florida right now. They're not giving a dime in taxes. And that's because the state legislature has allowed that to be the case by putting tax loopholes in the system, by allowing people to get out of paying taxes, by making it virtually impossible to raise taxes with their amendment they passed last time, and really preempting everything local governments do to make sure that they can't do anything about that as well. So really what we need is tax reform. We need a tax on corporations in the state of Florida. No more free riding. It's like the cruise industry, which is one piece of legislation I would like to introduce in my first term or sometime in my tenure, is to take on a cruise industry, which gives nothing to the state of Florida and nothing to the country. A lot of these are offshore companies, companies that use the Bahamas or some other island or another country, so that they can avoid paying taxes. But most of their business is coming from the United States. So we need to tax them. And we need to do the same thing so that's a lot of revenue right there that we can bring in from just taxing corporations, maybe a small income tax, maybe on the income tax part, maybe, just maybe not, who knows. But we definitely need to tax the corporations, and we definitely need to scale back on these sales taxes. So, I mean, that's one way of getting resources, and I think, we'd be smart if we did that.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised, coming here from New Jersey and the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, that there wasn't any sales tax or any income tax at all. So let's see. Well, what wanted to also ask about is, I guess, moving into just a fossil fuel free future. Would you support any movement to divest public funds, like publicly funded employee pensions, like the Florida retirement system, for example? Would you support divesting those funds from fossil fuel companies, and as well as the major financial institutions that support those projects?
Yes, I do 100%. And when I ran for school board, that was actually one of the things I said was something we should consider. So we definitely need to do that. And I'm completely in support of it.
What kind of hurdles would you foresee in something like that?
The legislature, the legislature would never let that happen. And if municipal governments try to do that, you'll probably see it preempted, like immediately in the next session. So we need to get environmental champions into the legislature. Otherwise, everything is just going to get preempted, or they'll pass legislation to make it harder for municipal governments to do this. But on the state level, it can be done if the legislation passes. If the legislation gets through the Florida House and Senate and signed by a governor, but we'll need all of those to be with people. So I don't think that will happen in like 2 years unless something big and bold happens. But so I'm not going to trick myself and say that's something I think will happen next year or the following year. But I definitely think it's something that could happen.
Yeah. And then following up on that, have you signed the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge, which basically is something that candidates pledge to not accept any donations from fossil fuel companies or their PACs or executives?
Yep, totally.
So you've already done that, or you would be okay doing it?
I think I've already done. I will have to check. I know I signed it in 2018. I have someone who's responsible for like making sure I get those things done. So I do believe I did already this cycle because I applied for some endorsement a while back and I had to sign that. So I do think I already did that. If I didn't, then I'll sign it tonight.
Well, yeah, we'll send you the link for that. All right. Well, thanks so much, Elijah, for answering some of these questions. Do we have any from the audience that anybody would like to ask Elijah a question? I don't see anything, but do you have any additional comments or?
No, but just get out there and vote strong.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and we forgive the hiccups, but it's been a real pleasure talking with you and listening to your insightful answers. And how can people find you?
You can find me just about anywhere. You can find me online, ElijahManley.com. Twitter at @ElijahManley. Instagram, Real Elijah Manley. Facebook, just Elijah Manley.
Excellent.
And I guess for now, until it's banned, you can find me on TikTok. I don't even know exactly what the username is right now.
Excellent. So actually, one more question before we go. You mentioned that you've worked with a lot of the youth climate movement in the past. Do you want to just explain some of the stuff that you've done with them, or why this is something that you really feel passionate about?
Yeah, I do. I've worked to help with 2 climate strikes, 2 or 3 maybe, climate strikes up here in Broward. I spoke at all of them. Outside of that, when I was running for school board, one of my policy ideas was to put solar panels on all of the school roofs and try to get the school board to divest from FPL. They didn't really like that at all, but that was one of the ideas, and I had a couple young people working with me on that when I was running. I've also worked with a few groups across the country. I'm close with a lot of the national youth climate folks, and I've done some work around this issue.
Cool. Well, as someone who's been involved with the environmental and climate movement for almost like 2 decades now, I've personally just been really impressed by the current generation, that you're part of, that's really been pushing on this issue, especially just because it's getting we're just down to the wire now as far as how much time we have left. Aside from the fact that time is running out, what do you think has really worked as far as being able to mobilize people?
Conversations like this about like how the intersections of all of these things, racial justice and climate justice, the intersections of how this is affecting different communities has helped mobilize a lot of different communities to get the work on this issue. So I think having deeper conversations about this is right. It can't just be the science says thing, a colorblind thing. It has to also talk about other issues in other communities and how this affects, because these issues affect different communities in different ways. And when we understand that, then we win over a lot more people. And I'm really good at talking to Republicans about this. I've been surprisingly really good with talking to Republicans about climate change. I don't know how the hell that's possible, but I have been, and I've gotten a lot of them to vote for me this cycle so far. And it's not just, I haven't just talked about the science, but I take real lived experiences of people and put them in their face and say, listen, you can't say this is fake. You can't say this isn't real. This is lived experiences of people. And I think that has worked the most.
Definitely. Well, thank you again for your passion and everything you've done to forward the movement towards a renewable energy future. And we wish you the best of luck in in this current campaign.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again, Elijah. It's great talking with you.
You too.